Welcome to the On-Meta report for Company of Heroes 3, covering January 2025. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my view on what is the most viable on-meta strategies for each faction in 1v1. I'll be doing this by explaining the units, battle groups, technologies, and analysing how they're being used effectively to win. I'll also give you some tips and tricks along the way so that you're prepared how to counter them when you take them on yourself. The core changes in Orchid Spider 1.9 patch has brought some notable changes to veterancy, abilities, and maps. The veterancy changes in particular have really brought a shake up to the metagame, where recon units are getting veterancy for capping, and there's some notable damage reduction changes on key units. Since Orchid Spider patch 1.90 was released on November the 27th, we've been seeing a metagame that's being dictated by the United States forces. We can observe since the patch has been released that across the whole ELO range bracket, US have a win advantage at 52%. But looking at the top 1600 ELO range of players, we can see that win rate starts to blow out even further to 55%. So why is this occurring? The patch's veterancy changes of improving the combat survivability of most infantry and support weapons at Vet 1 plays into the favour of the United States forces, in particular with the Scouts and 30 cal heavy machine guns. Both these units are quickly fielded, cheap, and have a fantastic synergy together with the Scouts guiding the heavy machine guns so they can set up in time and receive their damage reduction bonus prior to combat occurring. This is forcing Axis players to use risky and aggressive strategies to prevent United States forces gaining early territorial advantage. But Axis forces, in particular Wehrmacht, don't always have the tools to do this in the early game. At higher ELO ranges, this synergy between Scouts, 30 cal heavy machine guns, and the occasional bazooka squad are being used to greater effect. High-level players tend to be more active with their units, acquiring vision and consistently placing their heavy machine guns or sneaky bazooka squads in the right place at the right time to make first strike on the Axis forces. When Axis already have limited tools to deal with this in the early game, it can lead to a snowball effect in which it goes into the US forces' favour. Axis sometimes have to adapt their build from the start of the game before they even see an allied player's units, and sometimes this can really backfire. For example, a DAC double bike start might be fantastic versus a USF Scout heavy machine gun build, but it really struggles against Rifleman or Assault Engineers start. It can make the early game sometimes feel like a bit of a gamble, unlike other previous patches where there is more of a natural reactive flow in the early game. And don't get me wrong, the patch has brought forward some fantastic changes, and they're really going to improve COH3 in the long term. But with some small future balance tweaks, it'll put the game in a even better balanced state. But working with what is in the game at present, let's explore the current on-meta strategies in detail and how they can be countered. We will be starting with the US forces, as like I said earlier, that they are the trendsetters of the 1.9 Orchid Spider patch in the metagame. Their strongest strategy involves getting multiple scout squads. It can range anywhere from 2 to 4, and quickly capping the map to get an early advantage, but more important, a positional advantage, which lets the weapon support center, the tier 2 tech structure units, including the 30 cal heavy machine guns, bazookas, and half-tracks to get in threatening but safe positions. Scouts get 100 XP for capping each point, and it only takes 500 XP to get to Vet 1. And at that point, they receive a 15% harder to hit buff. Whilst 1.94 did bring nerfs to scout-based builds that transitions into Pathfinders, even after they move into Pathfinders, they can still create a significant early to mid-game advantage before the manpower upkeep and population drain effects of the nerf start to affect them. Be mindful, there are a number of variants of this strategy, including variants with artillery observers who are unaffected by the 1.94 Pathfinder nerf, or more commonly, just a couple of scouts into assault engineers and 30 cal heavy machine guns. For these variants, the United States Battlefield General strategy and Axis counters remain pretty similar. For the purpose of this on-meta report though, we will be focusing on the Pathfinder variant, which continues to be the most commonly encountered. Airborne Battle Group is selected here for Pathfinders, and as necessary, drop in paratroopers or an anti-tank gun as the game calls for it. The battle group selection is rounded off with recon runs and bombing runs to decimate the Axis support weapons or to force a retreat. The build order is to get 3 to 4 scouts, don't upgrade them to Pathfinders yet, get them out on the field first because they are cheaper at 150 manpower, whereas Pathfinders cost 200 manpower, so you can get more units out quicker, which results into more capping power and you want to send them to all sides of the map to claim the map as quickly as possible. Once you've got all your scouts, then upgrade them to Pathfinders. Build tier 2 with a weapon support center next and get a heavy machine gun. You can get a second one as well. And if they do have a early vehicle, usually this is against DAC, you can mix in a bazooka squad. Against Wehrmacht, getting a bazooka as the 221 scout car comes out is a good idea, especially to protect your M3 half-track if you opted to go for the quad upgrade. Go infantry support center for the captain, get the M3 half-track, and from there, you can keep it as standard to get the quad upgrade, or even make it into the 75mm anti-tank gun upgrade to deal with all Axis vehicles at any stage of the game. It can even tackle Panzer IVs pretty well. Then just call in paratroopers or anti-tank guns if you require, until you can start to afford the multiple Sherman tanks in the mid to late game. Key technologies only include healing and the bazooka upgrade if you've got a couple of bazooka squads out on the field. So otherwise, just invest all those resources into units with their individual squad upgrades as necessary. If you want to see how this game can play out, I'd encourage you to watch my Strat Chat video, episode 1, it's called Scout Swarm, to see a narrated example of how this strategy can work. Axis counter strategy needs to involve army compositions that enable Axis forces to be aggressive via light vehicle or support weapon based play. For DAC, this means using a bike or 250 half-track to prevent the scouts and MGs from capping the map early. Restrict the USF players' fuel control as much as possible and have it flow into assault grenadiers, particularly with their assault disembarkability to remove any heavy machine gun positions. This is one of the most hard-hitting options DAC can muster in the early game until DAC has mid-game light vehicles such as the 8RAD or Stug to do the heavy lifting. Be mindful though in the early game that USF bazooka squads, if you get caught out of position without prior scouting, their range bonus will secure the kill. So try your best to constantly keep track of their location and fight where they are not. For Wehrmacht, you can find strength in grenadiers and key support weapons such as the scout car, the LG40, or the flak. In particular, flaks are relatively cheap and can pack a punch to US half-tracks and heavy machine guns, while slowly allowing Wehrmacht to claim and hold territories in a mid-game counterattack. I'd encourage you not to build an early game mortar against USF heavy machine gun based play, as simply it just takes too long to force them to retreat, and by the time you do, they will have already created a huge resource advantage leading into Shermans. So with that covered, let's now have a look at the Axis builds in more detail. For Wehrmacht, the strategy is all about surviving the early game as much as possible so that the late game Wehrmacht army can come into effect. But how can Wehrmacht players get there from the early pressure set by US forces metagame? It's certainly not easy, but my recommendation is to go for Luftwaffe Battle Group with Tier 1 and Tier 2 base play. Luftwaffe Battle Group provides access to the LG40 recoilless gun, which can let you in the early game zone out any vehicle threats from a US's player's M3 half-track or a British player's Humber, whilst playing for the late game where infantry reserves and Stuka loiters can allow the Wehrmacht to win the manpower war ahead. A sprinkling of Fallschirmjägers in there as well can provide some surprise and anti-infantry punch. The build order looks like getting one Pioneer or Kettenkrad to cap the map in the early game with vision and provide utility via construction. After that, it's 3 Grenadiers, an MG42. You can also go for a 4th Gren, and then you want to build Tier 2 after that. Getting healing when necessary, and the LG40 recoilless gun when necessary. But the core units that you want to get from Tier 2 are the Scout Car to provide you that maneuverability and the flak anti-aircraft gun. That is the pushing power of this build. Eventually, mixing in Fallschirmjägers and a Jaeger via conversion for the anti-tank Panzerschreck as necessary until the Wirbelwind and Martyrs can get onto the field and start doing the heavy lifting. This build focuses on going both Tier 1 and Tier 2, but there is a decision that has to be made with respect to the Officers' Quarter upgrade, because you can only really afford one of those, either Tier 1 or Tier 2. My advice is to go for the Tier 2 upgrade. Getting the Tier 1 Infantry Officer Quarters upgrade can be really great when you go for a bit of an extended Tier 1 that moves its way into Tier 4, but going Tier 4 versus these builds that USF is throwing at Wehrmacht players is not realistically accessible because of how much pressure they apply the USF player. By the 12 to 13 minute mark, sometimes even the 11 minute mark, a Sherman can be in your face. Wehrmacht simply, with how much map control you lose to the scouts, won't be able to afford Panzer IVs to compete with the Sherman. Maybe if you are playing well, you might be able to get out one Panzer IV against two Shermans, and even then, that's a losing fight. So I'd strongly encourage you to make use of verbal VINs, Martyrs, and the Tier 2 Luftwaffe officer quarters that allow your Tier 2 units to come out with Vet 1 right out the bat, which gives them options to make use of some good abilities, whether that's through the Martyrs, first strike bonus, the verbal VINs, the Flak's ability to lay down suppression, and not to mention that with veterancy, the Flak 30 gun team gets some significant durability buffs with veterancy. It allows this unit to stay on the field longer, do more damage, and as necessary, merge into it with Grenadiers so that it can keep on just firing at the Allied forces. Eventually, the manpower bleed will catch up with the USF player, whilst the Luftwaffe 5CP choice of infantry reserves will bring the Wehrmacht ahead in the manpower war. I've won multiple 30-minute games as Wehrmacht with this build without going anything more than Tier 1 and Tier 2. I think in a few of the games I have gone for Tier 4 once it surpasses 30 minutes, but in that early mid-game stages, committing to Tier 1 and Tier 2 is a great idea. So how can this be countered if the Wehrmacht plays going for it? I'd say that the Wehrmacht's strength in this build is maintaining direct line of fire. So an allies player who's making good use of a shot blocking in the form of a house to protect their vehicle or using smoke to break down firing lines, especially on the flak, can become a pretty big menace for a Tier 1, Tier 2 base Wehrmacht build. US forces and British forces have plenty of access to smoke through scouts, Humber, mortars, and tanks. Attack grounds on the LG-40, the Flak 30, and Martyrs is not that effective and really makes things difficult, especially if they are already significantly behind in the VP war from the early pressure that allies can apply, and they'll have to take risks to break out. Smoking key positions and cutting the Axis forces in half with smoke is highly recommended. If there is any weaknesses identified in the mid-game, capitalize on it and be aggressive, because late-game Wehrmacht with veterancy, Stuka loiters, and infantry reserves can be a formidable and cost-effective threat the later the game goes. Moving on to DAC, we've seen the rise of the Assault Grenadier with the addition of the Assault Disembark by Relic. This has been a great addition which promotes combined arms mechanized plays by unleashing a volley of free grenades. This style of play has worked its way quickly into the metagame to hit hard and fast and shut down the rapid territorial expansion of USF and dislodge those problematic 30 cal heavy machine gun positions. No! Oh, he hit the mine! That was fortunate. That was so fortunate there, because now I've also got this lovely flank just here. That was fortunate, but you take what you can take. DAC Assault Infantry combined with mechanized Tier 2 base play allows them to move quickly and with speed to negate the vision advantage provided by USF scouts. Naturally, the battle group which complements this is the Armor Support Battle Group, whereby fire drills allows increased damage output on the ARADs and then flows into the Flame Panzer or the Command Tank for some additional armor. Salvage kits and Stuka support rounds off the battle group selection with loiters to break the tank line or dive bombs to break a support weapon line. The build order involves getting 2 bikes. The bike's role is to cap and deny captures from the scouts, bringing the fight only when you've got both bikes or a bike and a 250 Pyro combo in the region. One half track is also built as well, and that's to keep the Pioneer near or inside the 250. And you want to keep it alive as much as you can. If you get it to Vet 1, that is the best way to heal your infantry, which will be soon to come. Because the next 2 squads that you're going to be getting are 2 Assault Grenadiers. Note you can do this variant of the strategy with Panzer Grenadiers, but it will bleed more manpower comparatively to Assault Grenadiers, in particular when you're dealing with USF heavy machine gun positions with scout support. The Panzer Grenadier grenades won't impact the 30 cal heavy machine guns once they're set up, but the Assault Grenadier grenades via Assault Disembark will send them running. After that, you want to be teching to Tier 2, get the 8 right out, From there, you can get another 8 rad, you can get martyrs, recontractors as necessary. And eventually, I like to mix in a Stug D or command tank because it becomes a good option later to tank some damage, but also to buff the adjacent vehicles. In the late game, mixing in an additional Pioneer for more repairs, capping, salvage potential can be handy. When salvaging in risky areas, don't forget to use the Recontractor's smoke ability to provide some cover whilst you extract the resources from the wrecks. I also tend to save the 250 half-track call-in for AT purposes, whether that be through the Panzer Jaegers or more generally the anti-tank gun option, which I unlock after I get the support armor elements upgrade from Tier 2, which also now unlocks the Tier 1 fire support elements upgrade from the light support company. So be mindful of that. That was a recent change. And the 250 half-track anti-tank gun offers a better option when martyrs might be getting zoned out of the battlefield by bazooka squads. Allied counters to this strategy in the early game involved well-positioned infantry with handheld AT, so bazookas or infantry sections with the AT boys upgrade can really shut down early vehicle play. Use hedges and sight blockers to your advantage to mitigate the sight bonuses from the 2 bikes. But once the game moves into more the mid to late game, relying on those units alone for your AT can start to bleed a lot of manpower, especially from 8 rads where they've got the fire drills battle group upgrade. So be mindful of that. You want to eventually round off your army composition to be a good combination of mainline infantry via riflemen and infantry sections, mixed in with anti-tank guns and light vehicle AT options such as a Shaffy, Humber, or Stuart. And once these units are used in combined arms with one another, it can become quite problematic for a DAC player to dislodge. So keep on moving, avoid the recontractor fire, and you should be generally good as you move your anti-tank guns forward and slowly take back the map. And also, just don't forget to destroy all the wrecks. Shut down any salvage opportunity that the DAC player may find themselves looking for. So I've only been lightly touching on the British forces thus far, because like I said earlier, USS forces have been setting the pace of the metagame. The British forces versus Axis matchups, both of the Axis matchups, they're quite enjoyable to play with multiple viable strategies being present for all factions. A strong and balanced strategy, though, that still remains for the British forces is the Australian Defence Battle Group strategy, which I outlined in the previous September 2024 on Meta Report. However, in the 1.9 Orchid Spider patch, we've witnessed a resurgence of the heavy armour battle group. British forces are making use of the flexible infantry sections with dingoes and humbers in conjunction with the withdraw and refit ability to consistently diversify their army until Churchill tanks establish themselves on the front lines. Heavy armour battle group with the intent to get Churchill veterancy up as quickly as possible via the battle group option and tank training technologies is the way to go. Radio net and either of the offensive airplay abilities are both viable, but personally I prefer the designate targets as it's cheap, provides heaps of vision and debuffs both infantry and vehicles, allowing the Churchill tanks to decimate all the Axis forces in their pathway. The build order, it looks like getting 3 infantry sections, and from there getting a Vickers, mortar, or additional infantry section based on what your opponent's strategy is. The Vickers heavy machine gun, it's good if they've got a lot of mobile infantry through the form of like an MP40 Wehrmacht Grands, or if they've got support weapons like MG42s just sitting in buildings, mortar is a good option there. Otherwise, just get the 4th infantry section if you're not sure. Tier 2 for a Humber, and then bring in the anti-tank gun if necessary. After this, commit to anti-infantry units and infantry training tech until armor can be obtained. The AA Crusader, with the intent to refit it later into a Churchill tank, is a good idea. But with the Humber, it can be refit to accelerate Churchill production, but I honestly like to keep the Humber. Its smoke and vet 1 is invaluable in the late game. Not to mention, it can quickly protect territory and decapture on the map's sides. So, getting 1 Churchill tank when you can is enough, as otherwise the British forces can lose a fair bit of mobility. After that, focus on Crusaders, support weapons, and even consider ammo OP to spam the air battle group abilities or radio net. Single Churchill and multiple Crusaders are good because it gives you the balance between strength and mobility. But that's not to say that getting multiple Churchills is not always a bad idea. Sometimes getting multiple Churchills, pushing in the same location with infantry support gives you a massive power spike that can lead to a big punch. I'll let you make the decision on that, which way you want to go with it. This British Forces army composition is strong, but tends to be slow at gaining ground due to the slow moving nature of Churchills and the need for infantry sections to be fighting at maximum range to trade cost effectively. Therefore, as the Axis player, preparing fights where you force short range combat or are able to anticipate the British forces' movements are critical. My advice is to listen in the fog of war, as the Churchill is a slow-moving beast. If you are able to predict where they are moving, set up the anti-tank guns in camouflage with a timely snare, you will see the Churchills crawl back with a hefty repair bill. Which way is he coming? He's here. Yeah, he's coming this way. I gotta work those Grens back and then just brace for impact. I'll move the Grens forward now. So I've got a first volley strike. Secondly, try to bait engagements with key long-range units such as snipers, recon tractors, or even the Kettenkrad to get support weapons in the right place. It comes down to outplaying the British player with combined arms. The British versus Axis matchups, it's in a better place with only a few balance tweaks required to make it in a really good position for 1v1 in future balance patches. Both sides have multiple viable strategies and a fair chance to win the game. I hope this video gives you a helpful look into the metagame at present and gives you a heads up on how to tackle those holiday seasons games that you might be looking forward to. Happy New Year to everyone in the Company of Heroes community, whether you're a newcomer or a veteran. Together, I hope we can have a year full of good games and have heaps of fun. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye!